So basically, think of it this way, especially in terms of police officers, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, state troopers, and things like that. We want to create an environment as a society where we're incentivizing people to come and work those jobs because they're critically important and vital from a public service and public safety standpoint. These officers, troopers, they have to put themselves in harm's way. These are not safe jobs that they're doing. They're dangerous jobs. They're hazardous jobs. So to incentivize them to come in and perform those jobs as a society, we've decided that they ought to be afforded some level of immunity. And what that means essentially is that if they're engaged in certain conduct and somebody gets injured or killed and a lawsuit is filed against them, they may have immunity. What that means is you may not be able to bring that lawsuit.
This is Hollis Wright Managing Partner Josh Wright, and welcome to the Verdicts In Podcast Season 4. Here, our experienced attorneys break down the hottest legal stories making headlines and connect them to real cases from our firm's files. Each episode dives into current events, landmark verdicts, and trending legal debates, giving you practical insight into how law really works for you and in the real world. With candid conversations, expert commentary, and behind-the-scenes stories from active and past cases, The Verdicts In gives listeners a front-row seat to the intersection of news and personal injury law. Plus, in every episode, you'll pick up valuable legal advice straight from the front lines that can help you in your everyday life. Subscribe to The Verdicts In podcast wherever you get your podcasts and get great legal insight without the legalese. The Verdicts In podcast starts now. Welcome into the Verdicts In podcast. Josh Wright here with my partner, Carter Clay. Welcome. Talking about immunity today.
Yeah, immunity laws, they can be complicated, but we're going to try and simplify it as much as possible.
I have heard a rumor that there is a lawyer at this law firm that went down to Montgomery in the face of immunity defenses on behalf of a city and an officer who had done wrong, and was able to go down there and get a verdict, and is in the process of collecting that verdict right now and is dealing with immunity-related issues, but it's a good verdict. Is that true?
Well, that is all true with one exception. It was lawyers. So our partner...
You're not going to take all credit for it.
No. Craig Shirley, outstanding young attorney in our office, he was with me during that case. But yeah, we successfully got a $2.5 million verdict a few months ago in Montgomery County against the city of Montgomery and a police officer.
Yeah, and I know that's not easy to do. And immunity is this issue that people hear about, but they don't realize in Alabama, a lot of different types of entities and groups and individuals get immunity.
Yeah, so it's a little complicated, but let's start with this premise. So we've got two court systems. We've got the federal court system and we've got the state court system. So people out there have probably heard of concepts of deliberate indifference or conscious disregard. Those are concepts and terms that you hear in federal court under federal civil rights, police brutality, unlawful arrest, people getting abused or brutalized in jails and prisons and things like that. There are a lot of lawsuits that are brought against law enforcement agencies and individuals under federal civil rights law. Really what we're going to be talking about today, though, are state court claims and state immunity laws that apply in circumstances where a lawsuit is filed in state court, such as the Circuit Court of Montgomery County, where we filed our particular lawsuit.
Talk just a minute about, in general terms, Carter, what immunity is. Like, explain to someone that doesn't understand how someone could get immunity and not be subject to liability, how it just generally works.
Yeah, so basically think of it this way, especially in terms of police officers, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, state troopers, and things like that. We want to create an environment as a society where we're incentivizing people to come and work those jobs because they're critically important and vital from a public service and public safety standpoint. These officers, troopers, they have to put themselves in harm's way. These are not safe jobs that they're doing. They're dangerous jobs. They're hazardous jobs. So to incentivize them to come in and perform those jobs as a society, we've decided that they ought to be afforded some level of immunity. And what that means essentially is that if they're engaged in certain conduct and somebody gets injured or killed and a lawsuit is filed against them, they may have immunity. What that means is you may not be able to bring that lawsuit. You may be confronted with an out-of-the-gate motion to dismiss, claiming that they are immune or not subject to that lawsuit because of the laws that we have in place.
It sounds to me like immunity can apply at times to police officers and state agents, teachers, administrators in schools, and principals. Immunity could potentially apply in all those circumstances.
Yeah, really, anytime you're dealing with a cause of action that arises from a city employee or a county employee or a state of Alabama employee, you ought to immediately be looking into whether or not they may or may not have certain immunity for them, because if they do, you may be wasting your time. You may not be able to pursue the case.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the tremendous verdict that you got down in Montgomery with Craig first, because I want to unwrap that case just a little bit, because I think it is important to give context to how this works. So that case involves a police officer. Under normal circumstances, if a police officer is engaging in his discretionary function, meaning his role and responsibility as an officer, he generally is immune even if he's involved in an accident and causes some type of injury, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we want to distinguish a municipal police officer from a sheriff and deputy sheriff, because we're going to talk about those situations and those officers later in the show. But yeah, so what we were dealing with in this case is pretty straightforward. You had middle of the night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., you had a police officer that was responding to an incident that had occurred at a club down there. He was traveling on East-South Boulevard, where you've got sequential traffic lights, and he had gotten his speed up to 111, 112 miles per hour and was moving down the boulevard, and he had hit multiple green lights. But as he passed under the last green light, he was confronting a red traffic light for 6, 7, 8 seconds, heading towards that intersection, going 111, 112 miles per hour. He never applied his brakes to slow down cautiously as he got to that intersection. And our client was coming up from an intersecting roadway. She had a green light the whole time. She comes up. By the time she realizes he's coming at her, she stops, but she's out somewhat into the intersection. It's too late. He slams on his brakes at the last second. He veers at the last second, tries to avoid a collision, but he T-bones her vehicle. She sustained a severe fractured wrist that required surgery. She had a plate, several screws put in. She went to the hospital, was checked out at the hospital, and she had a really, really bad gash to her forehead, had to have multiple stitches, and has a pretty severe scar to her forehead. And so we prosecuted the claim. We confronted the immunity that we can talk about in just a minute. But that's what happened, and we went to trial. We got a $2.5 million verdict.
So under some circumstances, a police officer is able to violate the rules of the road that the rest of us have to comply with, but under certain circumstances, they got to comply with them.
Yeah, and what happened here is he had his lights and siren on as he was going down the roadway, and that's critical because there's a particular rule of the road or statute that regulates how police officers are supposed to act in these situations. One requirement is they have to have their blue lights and siren activated, which he did. The problem, though, is that he never applied his brakes to slow down at all as he proceeded into a red light when he knew it was a red light the whole time and knew the potential existed for somebody to come out on a green light. And that particular statute talks about how the privileges of the statute do not immunize you from reckless conduct. And so we had a very good argument that he was engaged in reckless or wanton type conduct because of the sheer speed that he was traveling. And there's actually a case that came out many years ago from the Alabama Supreme Court that was really kind of on point, where they said you're not going to get immunity in these types of situations. And in fact, the facts of our case were even more egregious than that Alabama Supreme Court opinion. So we feel very good about where we are from an immunity standpoint. We don't think he's going to have immunity.
And so there are circumstances where you can circumvent immunity when someone violates certain rules that they have to follow.
Yeah, and really what you're looking at is for somebody, we talk about hard and fast fast rules, policies, and procedures. When you get a case involving a municipal employee, a county employee, an officer, what you're looking for is whether or not there is a hard and fast rule that mandates how they are supposed to act in a certain situation. Because if there is no hard and fast rule, policy, or procedure, you start to tip over into what you've referred to as discretionary function immunity. What that means is that if there's flexibility or discretion in how the officer can act in a certain situation, they may very well have immunity.
You had to go dig in the books of the city.
Yes.
You had to go find that policy, and then you had to prove that that policy was violated in this circumstance. That's part of the good lawyering involved in this. By the way, weren't you also able to go into the person's history for maybe some reckless driving in the past? And I know we don't need to get into all the facts of the case, but you get to go into that person's life too when they're not operating a police vehicle on how they drive recklessly. Is that fair?
Yeah, he actually had an interesting event about a year before our incident where he was clocked doing over 100 miles per hour on the same street in his Ford Mustang that he had as his private personal vehicle.
I was ever impressed that you and Craig found that out and were able to present that to the jury, and I know that it was impactful. All right, so let's step aside just for a minute. When we come back, I want to talk about what happens, Carter, in the circumstance that that's not a municipal officer, but he is a sheriff, he is a sheriff deputy, or a constable, or some other type of officer, and how that would have changed the complexity of the case itself. All right, so we're going to step away, and we'll come back in just a little bit. Again, remember, Hollis Wright is here all the time, 24/7, 365 days a year. You can call us at 844-LAW-TALK or find us at hollis-wright.com. And we hope that you will find this podcast and consume your viewing and listening of podcasts, and however you do it, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Alexa, Amazon, or even our website at hollis-wright.com. And we'll continue to watch Season 4. We'll be back in just a minute, right after this break.
Hollis Wright has assembled one of the best trial teams in the state of Alabama. A team that doesn't quit, a team that never backs down, a team that has the skills to take your case all the way. Let Hollis Wright tell your comeback story.
The attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show in 2011, my goal was to do what our firm does best: help people answer questions related to real-world legal issues they have in their lives in a way that's not intimidating to talk with a lawyer. If the issue is important to you, it's equally important to us, and we're ready to talk with you at no cost.
Yeah, oftentimes people are confronting various legal issues in their lives that really run the gamut of a lot of different legal practice areas, such as bankruptcy, criminal law, civil law, such as personal injury, divorces, domestic relations. And to be able to have a show once a week that covers those practice areas and answers people's questions in those areas, that's really the main objective of the show.
We use the resources of the many lawyers at our law firm to create a plan that has a lasting impact for each person that calls or texts. And we also give back to the community at the same time. We are here to serve you, the viewer, each week on The Attorneys. Welcome back to the Verdicts In podcast. Josh Wright here with my partner, Carter Clay. Welcome back, Carter. When we went to break, we were talking about this great verdict you got down in Montgomery with Craig from our law firm, and how that could have changed if the individual operating was not a municipal city officer, but was a sheriff or a sheriff deputy. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's an easy question, unfortunately, to answer. And how it would have changed is we probably would not have had a lawsuit. So when you talk about sheriffs and deputy sheriffs, they are constitutionally, under the Alabama Constitution, they are established as law enforcement officers in the state of Alabama. And it's way too long. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but they are afforded absolute immunity under these types of circumstances. And we want to highlight some of what I think are really tragic and unfair outcomes that can occur when you're dealing with a deputy sheriff or a sheriff. So yeah, so if my client had been hit by a deputy sheriff or a sheriff in Montgomery County, then he or she would have been afforded absolute immunity, meaning we would have filed the lawsuit. We probably would have been confronted with a motion to dismiss claiming that the sheriff or deputy sheriff is entitled to absolute immunity because at the time of the incident, they were carrying out their job responsibilities in furtherance of the interest of the state of Alabama. And that's a critical issue that we are confronting right now in the state of Alabama.
So some of these immunity laws actually negatively impact consumers out there in the marketplace and individual citizens that are injured by wrongful conduct.
Yeah, and I think it's about finding a fair and just balance. I'm going to cite, of course, the example that I just gave of how our situation would have changed. There are numerous examples of what I would contend are unjust outcomes, and it just doesn't make sense as a society that we're going to give deputies and sheriffs absolute immunity. Should they be afforded maybe that same level of discretionary immunity that municipal officers and even troopers with the state that they have? Yeah, but to just give them blanket absolute immunity really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, like, take our situation. I mean, our young lady was hurt badly, but think about if it was a family of four. Think about if you've got a sheriff or a deputy that is engaging in conduct to further the state's interest. They're going to a scene where there's some event going on and they're trying to get there, and let's say they don't have their lights and sirens on, but they are in the line and scope and they're engaging in that type of activity. If they run a red light and kill a family of four, under Alabama law right now, they would be afforded absolute immunity. You could not bring that lawsuit. And how do you, it's tough explaining that to clients who've lost loved ones or have been considerably injured, that they just have no recourse if it involves a sheriff or deputy.
So when you're talking about things like excessive force or unreasonable use of force, use of a weapon, are there circumstances where you can also attack from federal claim perspectives?
Yeah, if you have sufficient evidence, and I want to really highlight sufficient evidence, because under the federal civil rights laws, they have to be brought in federal court. Oftentimes, the burden of proof is higher. The burden of production of evidence is higher. Those cases can often be pretty challenging to win in federal court. But if you have police or sheriff brutality or something along those lines, the immunity laws that we're talking about don't apply to the federal causes of action. Now, it can get a little complicated because sometimes you can bring a federal lawsuit that has federal civil rights claims as well as the state law claims. So you could have a federal court that may kick out your state law claims based on this absolute immunity, but you still may be able to survive under the federal civil rights claims. But I wanted to highlight one particular case that I found that was decided a couple of years ago involving a mentally ill individual, a male. His wife called the sheriff because he was acting erratically. He was acting out. A deputy comes to their house. There's a verbal altercation outside the home between the mentally ill individual and the deputy. The deputy was anywhere from 10, 20 yards away from the mentally ill individual the entire time. There was some allegation that the individual who was mentally ill said something like, "Give me all you got." Never brandished a weapon, never showed a weapon, never anything, but made some comment about "give me all you got." And then the mentally ill individual turned around and the deputy shot him 19 times. 19 times. And a lawsuit was filed on behalf of that deceased individual. And for the state law claims, they were afforded absolute immunity. They couldn't bring the case. And I'm not saying necessarily that the mentally individual should have won the claim, but they never were even able to really present their claim. They couldn't even get off home plate to get to first base because of the absolute immunity laws.
We're going to step away for a minute, but when we come back, I want to talk about the importance, and I know you'll be able to unwrap this, the importance of making sure that people are hiring the right law firms that can properly evaluate what potential claims are out there, both from a federal and a state perspective, if immunity applies. And again, immunity is not just for police officers. It can apply to teachers. It can apply to a whole host of different things. And so we're going to step away just for a moment, but we'll be back shortly. We thank you, first of all, for watching or listening to our podcast. We hope that you will continue to consume the podcast in whatever format that you normally listen to podcasts. We've got 3 previous seasons, and this is season 4 for us. We've actually changed the digs a bit and changed the location of our podcast, but hope you'll use our podcast to be able to learn some important information related to our law firm, but also some of the legal topics. We're going to be back in just a minute. We hope you'll stick with us, and we hope to unwrap a little bit more related to immunity under Alabama law and under federal law as soon as we get back. The greatest stories are comeback stories. If you've been injured, Hollis Wright is here to tell yours. Let us be the author of your story and start by making one call to our attorneys. Let Hollis Wright tell your comeback story. If you've been injured in an accident, trust the local Alabama lawyers who've been helping local people for more than 20 years. At Hollis Wright, our personal injury attorneys are right here in Birmingham and are ready to tell your comeback story. Welcome back into the Verdicts In podcast. Josh Wright here with Carter Clay from Hollis Wright. What do you think about the name change first? Verdicts In.
I like it. I like the new set too.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got the jury behind us.
I like
Need
it.
to get some people back here.
We probably need to do that. All right. So, hey, when we went to a quick break, I was talking just a little bit. I think this is really important for people to understand. Either that are trying to find a home for a case that requires immunity, or someone that's been injured and immunity may apply. Why is it important to get the right law firm involved? I've watched and marveled at the work you and Craig did to go get this verdict and understand this area of the law. Not every firm does this. So talk about that.
Yeah, a lot of firms don't want to do this type of work because of these immunity laws and because of the risk associated with handling these types of cases. As you know, Josh, all of our cases here are handled on a contingency fee, which means that our ability to get paid and recover our expenses is conditioned upon a successful recovery. Well, if you're out of the gate confronting these immunity questions or immunity laws, and it's something that's going to be hanging over you in the case the entire time, a lot of people just don't want to take on that risk. The other aspect to it is that you really want to find somebody that is sort of specialized in this area. Specialized might not be the best word, but it has a lot of experience handling these types of cases because they can be lucrative cases. You can be successful in these cases, but you really have to do a lot of work. You've got to get all of the policies and procedures, and you've really got to understand this area of the law, because if you don't, a lot of these cases can and will go out either at the motion to dismiss stage or at the motion for summary judgment stage. And I kind of feel like we've developed a little bit of a niche area in handling these types of cases. As you know, our partners, Michael Eldridge and Craig Shirley, they've got some cases going on right now, got a trial coming up as well. So you really want to, for people out there that have this type of case, what I would tell them is, if you're talking to a lawyer, you need to ask them, how many of these cases have you handled in the past, and how many of those cases have you been successful at handling? I think those are 2 critically important questions.
Well, we see immunity a lot of times, too, in cases in jails, in the classroom. And so this is a pretty prevalent area of the law, but there aren't a lot of firms out there that are really good at this. You know, you talked a little bit about a contingency fee contract. Really, in my assessment, as long as I've been involved in cases and on the side where contingency fees are used, weighing risk is so critically important. And you talked a little bit about the briefing required here. I mean, the risk associated with taking these cases is pretty difficult to evaluate. But the timing and the briefing necessary and the paperwork required to go get the right documents to get through summary judgment and get to a trial, there's a lot of work involved in this.
There is. So you're almost always going to confront what we call a motion for summary judgment. And that's a fancy way of saying that at some point during the case, the municipality or the governmental entity or officer, they're going to file a motion asking the court to dismiss the case based on the fact that the officer is immune from the lawsuit for all kinds of different reasons, that he did not violate a hard and fast rule, or that he did not violate a policy and procedure. One unique aspect to these cases also that makes our job challenging is that if the trial court denies that motion for summary judgment, the law gives the municipality an automatic right to appeal that decision to the Alabama Supreme Court under what we call a writ of mandamus procedure, which is basically the trial court abused their discretion by not dismissing the case. So not only have you done the brief writing to oppose it at the trial court level, if they opt to then immediately appeal it to the appellate court, then you're going to be potentially writing a brief at the appellate court level, all just to get your case back to the trial court to then be able to present your case to a jury to try and get a verdict. So there's a lot of brief writing.
Slows your case down too.
Slows your case down.
And you got to temper that with your client. Your client has to understand that.
That's right. A lot of frustration sometimes from the client. Again, we've talked in other episodes about the wheels of justice moving slowly, and sometimes they can and oftentimes do when you're confronting a municipality. Like, for instance, the verdict that we got, that case is up on appeal right now, and they're going to make one more run at trying to argue that the police officer was immune because he was not violating a hard and fast rule or a policy and procedure, and therefore our case never should have gotten to trial.
I know we're getting close to wrapping up here, but I do want to unwrap one final issue, and that is, in a lot of these cases, you're not just naming the officer that was involved in the wrongful conduct, you're naming the city, the municipality. How does that interplay in these lawsuits from both an insurance perspective, but also from an immunity perspective?
Yeah, well, very simply, so yes, oftentimes we are including the municipality or the city that the officer was working for at the time of the incident. We'll include them as a defendant, and we will also sue the officer in what we call their individual capacity. Now, why do we do that? It's pretty simple. The city is capped at $100,000. So you could pursue a claim against the city. You could go and get $1 million verdict against the city on behalf of your client. That $1 million verdict is automatically going to be reduced to the municipal cap of $100,000. However, under Alabama law, the individual municipal police officer is not eligible for that cap. So if you go and get $1 million judgment or verdict against the officer in their individual capacity and the city's damages may be reduced to $100,000, but you can still enforce your judgment against the police officer up to that $1 million judgment amount. Now, is it collectible? Well, we'd like to hope that it is. That's why we went and got it, and we want to try and collect that money on behalf of our client. But a lot of that's going to depend on the extent to which the city purchased and has liability insurance for their police officer that would then step in and pay that judgment for that individual police officer, and we could set up another whole 30-minute show.
This
to
me sounds like a day in the life of Carter Clay trying to navigate through the insurance issues associated with collecting a verdict he's already received.
That's exactly right. So again, it's challenging in these cases, but we do it because we believe in our clients. We believe they deserve justice, and in certain situations, we believe strongly that the police officer should not be afforded immunity because they were supposed to or they were required to act a certain way, and they did not do what they were supposed to do. And look, we're not defund police people around here, right? We need police. We need as many police officers as possible, but there's a balance, right? You want to provide them with some level of immunity if they have discretion and flexibility to do things a certain way. But if they don't have that discretion, or if they don't have that flexibility, if they're required to do it a certain way and they don't, and somebody gets injured or killed, then we ought to be able to present that case to a jury.
Also known as some officers are doing it the right way and they need to be protected, and some aren't doing it the right way and they don't need to be.
That's correct.
Great job.
Thank you.
Topic,
Appreciate
by the
you
way,
having me.
and good luck on the collecting the verdict. I
Thank
know you're out there doing that right now with Craig. And thank you for listening to the Verdicts In podcast. We hope you'll remember, if nothing else, that we are here 24/7, 365 days during the year. Hollis-Wright.com or 844-LAW-TALK. We're always available and always ready to help answer your questions if it relates to immunity or something else. We hope that you will tune in again, and we'll see you next time on the Verdicts In podcast. Thank you for attending.